So this is supposed to be the oldest house in Cheraw.
Really?
The wing on my left was built sometime around 1780, and then the new part of the house, this part, was built in 1848. I love historic buildings and am really active in preservation, and so it suited me fine to come live in Cheraw because we have so many gorgeous antebellum buildings here. Cheraw is a small place in a little corner where people used to know about it because it was on US 1, and that was the first major north-south highway. So they came through Cheraw. But once we got I-95, people didn't have to come through here. But because Dizzy Gillespie is from Cheraw, some people at least have heard of it.
I'm Devin Whitmire. People from South Carolina, like myself, are proud of their state and everything it has to offer. But even we don't know every nook and cranny. So we're traveling to the most charming places in the Palmetto State. Some of them you know, and some of them even we have never heard of. From Discover South Carolina, it's the Palmetto Porch. Today, we're stopping in to Cheraw, home of jazz legend Dizzy Gillespie. Thank you for joining me today on the Palmetto Porch. I'm so excited to see you and to get to know you a little bit. To get us started, do you think you could just start out by telling us your name and a little bit about where we are?
I'm Sarah Spruill, and we're on my front porch in Cheraw, South Carolina.
We are actually on a front porch for the Palmetto Porch, and I'm just really excited about that.
We're so glad you're here.
So what brought you to Cheraw? What is your story in connection to the town?
I grew up in Darlington, but I lived in Charleston for a little while. I lived in Columbia for a little while. But after I married my husband, whose family is from Cheraw, I thought we would probably come back here eventually, and we did. So I've lived here now, I think it's been 50 years.
50 years. Okay, now, and you said Cheraw. Is that the proper way to say it?
That is the way that the older people in Cheraw pronounce it, like church or chapel. But some people do say Cheraw.
Okay.
But Cheraw is what the old pronunciation is.
So would you call yourself a historian of Cheraw?
Well, a lot of people call me that. I kind of, when we moved here, there was a lady named Cora Justice, who was sort of the Cheraw historian of her day, and she and my father-in-law and mother-in-law all were very knowledgeable about Cheraw history.
Sarah's approach to history ties together people, places, and events. She often uses historical buildings and estate records to paint a picture of life in Cheraw. The process can be difficult. What does it take to document the history of a town like Cheraw? Because there are literal encyclopedia entries online where you are the author about this town.
Well, it's difficult. Some of the owners of these buildings actually own their own deeds that survive from the time period. Some of the things like Old St. David's, we have the original vestry records from 1768, and the plans where they were laid out in those vestry records. But General Sherman and his Union Army came through Chesterfield County in March of 1865, and they burned the courthouse in Chesterfield, which is about 15 miles from here.
Mm-hmm.
So while we had excellent records up to a point, we no longer have them, and we had the records from Darlington County and Georgetown County stored there, and so a number of those counties' records were lost at the same time. So it's difficult to have actual proof of some of the buildings here in Cheraw, but we do have some surviving newspapers from the time where they talk about planting the trees that are in some of the medians still here in Cheraw, and it makes it interesting.
They literally recorded the planting of trees.
So the story about the trees And there are lots of stories out there, but I believe this one actually.
Okay.
So the story is, and this was, we're on that same ridge that Columbia's on, that Sandhills Ridge and Camden and Pinehurst, North Carolina. But we're up on a hill, and so if you were caught drunk and disorderly in public in 1830, part of your punishment would have been that you had to go dig from the swamps a hardwood tree and plant it on the streets of Cheraw, and that's why we have so many trees.
Your penance was you had to plant a tree.
Yes.
How creative.
So I've also, in reference to that, heard a story where a man was here in town and did get drunk and said, well, I think I'm going to ride through my woods home to get another tree to plant in town.
I love this.
John Burke's Dizzy Gillespie, a name that needs no introduction. He was a jazz legend, known for his signature bent trumpet, and he was born in Cheraw.
I want to talk a little bit about Dizzy Gillespie.
Yes.
Dizzy is a famous native of Cheraw. Can you give us just a quick bio in your own words?
So he was born here and lived here until he was 14. There is a park here now at the home site, and he loved Cheraw. His family left here as part of the great migration that went north for better opportunities. His father died rather suddenly. Mm-hmm. He had a friend here. His name was Norman Poe, and there was a school in North Carolina that Norman went there, and Dizzy was able to go there with Norman, which allowed him to, you don't think about some of these things, but so many of the jazz musicians didn't actually know how to read music.
Salt Peanuts is one of Dizzy's famous songs. So if you go to the Homesite Park in Cheraw and you can read music, you can play it.
But because of Norman Poe, Dizzy Gillespie did, so that he could write down some of his works. And the fence, for example, at the Dizzy Gillespie Homesite Park is the actual notes to Salt Peanuts, which he was able to write down because he could read music. But he came back to Cheraw often. He had cousins who lived here, and Norman Poe lived in New York City for years, but came back to Cheraw, so he came back to see Norman. And you would just see Dizzy sitting on the town green.
Yeah.
Or sitting on the porch of the market hall. So he never forgot Cheraw, and when he introduced himself, I'm Dizzy Gillespie from Cheraw, South Carolina, is the way he would say it. He talks a lot about Cheraw in his autobiography, which is To Be or Not to Bop. Uh-huh. And so we know a lot about his time in town growing up here.
In Cheraw, I love it. Dizzy is famous for the bent trumpet, right?
Yeah.
What's the story behind that?
Well, I hear other stories, but what is it in To Be or Not to Bop is that he was at a party and someone sat on his trumpet and he decided he liked the way it was bent as it was. So when we have the South Carolina Jazz Festival in mid-October around Dizzy's birthday, we sometimes family members will loan one of his trumpets. One of them is at the Smithsonian, but we'll loan one of his trumpets so that we can have it on display here in town for visitors to see. So him being from Cheraw, we had a great celebration of him in the 60s, but of course we have a statue of him on the town green, and it is by an artist who was one of America's first astronauts. His name is Ed Dwight. He is a really wonderful artist. After his Air Force career, he founded an art studio and has done work for the Smithsonian and for the Underground Railroad Trail and jazz artists for the Smithsonian, and some of us in Cheraw got to go to the Kennedy Center when he was given the Kennedy Center honors. And it was such an adventure and so much fun.
And you knew Dizzy. You've met him.
Yes.
What was his personality like beyond the music?
Well, it was just like him. He, was so effervescent and so much of a presence, but also funny and quite serious about his music.
Yeah.
And I used to work on the town green. My office was there. And I would see people and foreign license plates in town, and sometimes they would bring their trumpet so that they could take a picture next to the Dizzy statue on the town green. So it was fun to see a whole family group standing there getting their pictures taken.
When people think of jazz, they often think of bigger cities like New York City or Chicago. What's the importance of recognizing the role that similar southern cities have played in the genre?
Well, so many of them actually started out in the South, but right here, John Coltrane was from Hamlet, which is less than 20 miles from here. So there were some other singers and musicians in this area. And of course, in South Carolina, we've got Chubby Checker and, a lot of fun people.
So many musicians from the South go on to become household names, just like Dizzy. I wanted to know why.
So on the street that Dizzy grew up on, there was a church. It's still there. It's not the same building, but the congregation is still there.
Yeah,
the Sanctified Church. And their music is one of the things that inspired him because it was so rhythmic. And his own father was a jazz musician.
So you think the gospel music and that connection to the church really influenced?
Oh, definitely. And he writes about the Sanctified Church in To Be or Not to Bop. And we've had a PBS series on jazz musicians came here, and they actually had the Sanctified Church choir perform, and still that syncopated sound that and the a cappella off the melody that you pick up in jazz. I'm not an expert on it by any means, but he played Dizzy when he was here, even as a 14-year-old. They had a little band, and they played for dances here and at the other towns around.
Yeah. Are there tours that people can take of these places and hear the stories?
So the town has several. It has a cell phone tour. It has a brochure that tells a lot more than the cell phone tour does on these houses. There are some people who do group tours here. Even people coming from up north on their way to Florida stop by. But a lot of senior groups come from the area. And so Cheraw has always been interested in its own history.
South Carolina is growing. More people are moving into small towns like Cheraw. Sarah says preserving the history of a place like Cheraw is important, even as times change.
I think all of us interested in preservation have found is that we have to fight the good fight with every generation.
Yeah.
That sometimes people don't understand.
How do you feel about your role as a preserver of Cheraw's history and culture?
I don't know. I do it because I love it, and I have met so many interesting people because of it. Cheraw is one of the places that people went to the West, and the West then was Alabama and Louisiana and Texas, and so there's a little tiny place in Alabama called Cheraw. There's a place in Colorado called Cheraw.
Really?
Yes, really. Both of which were named for Cheraw, South Carolina. But we do have people who come back here looking for their roots. One of them was a former governor of Texas, for example. One of them was a former Secretary of State. I wouldn't have gotten to meet these people otherwise. And I've met so many people over the years that it just have been a real pleasure to talk to and to learn from them, as well as being able to help them with what their roots.
As a quote-unquote expert and historian and local and just lover of your town, are there 3 things that you would tell someone that they needed to experience if they were going to come and make a trip for a day or a weekend and come and visit Cheraw?
I always just love to tell people to ride through the historic district. 3rd Street is a particularly pretty street to ride down. And we have some cute little shops downtown, and there's some cute restaurants, too. So you can make a weekend or just a day trip. And we do get people doing those things, just coming to experience what's here. It's a pleasure to live here, and we like company. So I hope people will come visit us.
I so enjoyed my day in Cheraw. The impact of Dizzy Gillespie's legacy on the town can be seen all over, and his spirit can be felt from people like Sarah. I'm so grateful to her for opening her beautiful home and sharing her stories with us. To learn more about this and all the towns we're featuring on the show, visit scpalmettoporch.com. The Palmetto Porch is produced by Discover South Carolina in partnership with Pod People. Special thanks to our production team at Pod People, Lauren Luco, Ben Sauls, Lauren Sauls, Grace Pina, and Kim Wong.